Hello, my name is Pauline Fusco. I'm doing page 3 of the biochemical tests assignment, and that's going to be the durum sugar tube, the methyl red test, and the Voges-Proskauer test. I'm going to go ahead and inoculate all 3 of these test tubes at the same time because they have the incubation at the same temperature and for an overlapping period of time, 12 to 48 hours for the durum sugar and 48 to 72 for the MR and VP tests. First step, label everything. Each test tube should have the name of the test, my initials, the date, and plus the name of the source culture. If it's an unknown source culture, usually it's going to be like UNKA or just plus A, something like that. So all 3 of those will be labeled. The source culture itself should be labeled with the unknown A, whatever the source is, and when it was made, who made it. All 3 of these, the material is going to be transferred from the source culture slant using an inoculant loop. So we'll go ahead and get started. Let's go ahead and sterilize the inoculant loop in the incinerator for about 10 seconds. Then I'm going to pick up the source culture with my left hand, uncap it with the fingers on my left hand, and put the rim of the source culture close to the incinerator, in front of the incinerator heat for about 2 to 4 seconds. Then I'm going to take the inoculant loop and I'm going to draw it shallowly parallel to the surface of the slant. The loop itself is going to be flat. I'm not dragging it into so much as I'm sort of skipping along the top of the source culture. It's plenty enough to, you shouldn't even barely be making slight shallow drag marks. That's enough to transfer plenty of culture to the loop. I'll repeat the process of sterilizing the rim for 2 to 4 seconds, and from here on out, when I say sterilize the rim, you'll know that I'm saying move it in front of the micro incinerator for 2 to 4 seconds. Then I'm going to recap the source culture with the fingers of my left hand again and then put it down gently into the rack. I understand that people often show holding the test tube and the source culture in the same fingers, and that's definitely doable, but it's easier to talk it out if I'm not trying to be like, and then in this hand, and then in this hand, plus my hands are small. So then I pick up the durum sugar tube, my left hand, uncap it with the fingers of the same hand. So from now on, whenever you hear uncap it, it's going to be uncap it with the fingers of my left hand, the same hand that's in. And then I'm going to put the inoculant loop down into the mixture, even with the little glass upside down bit. It just kind of squeezes in the side there. And just spin it back and forth, kind of like when you're rolling a pen between your fingers. That is plenty enough to get the inoculant material off the inoculant loop. Withdraw the inoculant loop and sterilize the inoculant loop in the incinerator again. Sterilize the lid of the rim of the durum sugar tube, which I may not have mentioned, but you should be doing that immediately after I remove the cap as well. Recap the durum sugar tube, put it back in the tray. Pick up the methyl red test tube with my left hand, remove the cap, same fingers, sterilize the rim. We'll go ahead and assume that I've already picked up the source culture slant and done the exact same things I did before, which is draw the loop parallel to, pretty much roughly parallel to the surface of the slant, flat, just sort of dragging just a little bit. So we've already done that, and then we'll have done that for every time we do this. And then with the uncapped and sterilized methyl red test tube, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put the inoculant loop into the tube, swirl it kind of back and forth between our fingers a few times. By a few times, I usually say like 3 to 5 seconds is more than enough to get it off. And remove it, sterilize the inoculant loop. Probably the most important part of this process, because even if you you're not really sterilizing the rims of the test tube so much as you're creating like a convection current to sort of keep like aerosolized contaminants out. So obviously the most important part in the aseptic transfer is just not putting the loop down and making sure you're sterilizing it in between transfers. And of course capping the test tubes afterwards. That's kind of important. So the inoculant loop is sterilized, and I've sterilized and recapped the methyl red, the rim, and then recapped the methyl red test tube. And so I'm going to put that methyl red test tube back in the rack. Next, the Voges-Proskauer test, same thing. I have the sterilized inoculant loop. I've got the Voges-Proskauer test tube uncapped, sterilized, and I've already transferred the inoculant culture to my loop. So that loop is going into the Voges-Proskauer test tube, and I'm spinning it back and forth between my fingers and in the test tube. The test tube itself is stationary in my hands. Withdrawing it, sterilizing the inoculant loop again, sterilizing the rim of the test tube, or, well, you know, we've said that. Recap it, put it in the tray. And that is it for transferring everything. So we're going to go ahead and put those in the incubator for 37 degrees for 48 hours. Now when we open the incubator, we're going to first be observing to see if there was actually any bacterial growth at all in the durum sugar tube. The durum sugar tube should be showing immediate results because it already has the reagent mixed in. And actually I shouldn't be saying reagent, I should be saying indicator, but we'll assume that every time I've actually said that I meant reagent or indicator. We should be looking for, is it changed color? Because if it's changed color, it's produced an acid. Well, if we're looking for bacterial growth, we're looking for turbidity, fine particulates, anything like that. If there is turbidity or some evidence of growth or gas production, we can or color change, any one of those three things really, we can go ahead and record that. If there's no evidence of growth, we'll write NG, and if there's really no growth at all, and no evidence of growth, we won't see a color change, we won't see gas production, so it's kind of done there. Like, either we didn't inoculate it correctly with the sufficient materials, or it is not producing acids or gas. If it's producing an acid, it will change color to yellow. If it is for some reason producing a base, it would go to a deeper red because it will go, phenol red will go 8.5. And above will be deep red, and 6.9, which is acid, and below will be yellow. And if there's gas, we'll see it, and it's kind of hard to tell in this picture, but we'll see it in sort of like here. There'll be little bubbles. So we can go ahead and set that aside, but that is all we need to do with the durum sugar tube, is record those observations. The methyl red test tube needs to have the indicator put in, or the reagent put in. And so that is going to be, I want to mention that the methyl red test is for essentially determining whether you have enteric bacteria that can transform glucose into acids. And the methyl red, if the pH decreases, which indicates acid production, you are going to see it'll turn red. So we are going to be adding, we're going to have some sedimentation because if there's growth, there should be some sort of sedimentation or turbidity in the broth. And so we're going to kind of gently shake it between the fingers of my left hand. And then we're going to have the methyl red. There's going to be a separate dropper. I do not recommend, so it's in these videos, it's shown as using the dropper that's actually in the chemical container. I would not do that in a normal lab. I would use a pipette with the disposable tips, or I would use one of the pre-built, like say 1 millimeter pipettes, so that you know exactly what you're adding. But in this case, the directions call for adding 20 drops of methyl red indicator. So I would remove the lid with my left hand. I would either be using a disposable pipette or I'd be using the dropper, depending on what the instructions were. I would be sterilizing the rim of the test tube top for 2 to 4 seconds. Then I would add the 20 drops of methyl red and swirl well. Recap the methyl red container, set aside. Now the methyl red test should be immediate. If it changes color, you've got something to report. If it's the same color, then it's not doing anything. Move on to the Voges-Proskauer test. Now the Voges-Proskauer test is a 2-part addition. So you can do the same thing. You're kind of going to shake it gently between your hands, your fingers, and by shake I mean swirl. You're going to have the reagent A and reagent B, which is alpha and alpha. Reagent A is alpha naphthol, and reagent B is 5% potassium. Oh my God, KOH. I just blanked. Once again, pick up the test tube in your left hand, uncap it with the same fingers, sterilize the rim in front of the microincinerator, Add 10 drops of the alpha-naphthol. Then add 10 drops of the KOH. Mix well, that means swirling. Swirl well. Usually the recommendation is for at least 30 seconds with the Brooks-Pascoe test. Then put it in the incubator at the same temperature, 37 degrees, for 30 minutes, but every 5 minutes you're going to pull it out and you're going to swirl it again. Now, there's one thing that I didn't really mention with this that's sort of automatic for me, is that unless otherwise told, I don't completely cap my tubes. Unless it's got to be anaerobic, I do have to have some way for oxygen to get in there. So if it's a screw-on cap, then it's basically screw it like gently finger tight and then like back off a half turn or whatever you want to do. If it's like a looser cap, you would just leave it a little bit loose. And so for all of these, for the incubation and for adding the reagents, you should be having that. It should be only lightly capped. So at the end of 30 minutes, you are going to be taking a look at it after you've been swirling and checking and swirling and checking. And if positive, the solution in the tube will be pink or red. Now what that means is that it's testing for not butanediol, which would be the alcohol that would be produced from production of butanediol from glucose, but acetone, which is a precursor to the butanediol. You can't get butanediol without acetone, so it's a pretty good indicator. And if you have acetone, it'll be pink or red. If you do not, then the solution will remain the same color, yellow, tan, or darken. Then you will have to properly dispose of all of these according to the directions in which they do not actually mention in our lab report, so I don't actually know how to do that. That's all. Thank you.